Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Official Visit podcast. I am Tyson Alger. I am joined to my left, to your right on your radio dials by Andrew Greif of the Oregonian, OregonLive.com. We cover the Oregon Ducks. We are right now covering a team that is going into the Washington game with a 3-3 record. Ducks have won 11 in a row. I think Andrew Greif has won every one in a row. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing well. We are covering a team in transition right now, Tyson, and it's an awkward spot to be in after covering a national championship caliber team last year, and it's in some ways very interesting from my perspective, not from a fan's perspective, but very interesting to see a team that is mortal, that is going through a lot of growing pains, and we're really seeing the difference 1 year makes. It's pretty jarring. It's not all Marcus Mariota, but I think a lot can be put on his back.
And I think, judging by some of the Twitter comments you and I have gotten, there's a lot of people who aren't satisfied with us not calling for Helfrich's head yet. I wrote a story on Matt Logan today, who is one of the kind of lone decent performers over the last couple of weeks. You know, at some point you got to write a positive story when a guy's doing well. And it didn't go over well.
The place kicker is having a very good year. Mm-hmm. Let's just break that down real quick, off the top.
Yeah, so Matt Logan lost the starting place kicking job to Aiden Schneider last year, who was a walk-on, and it was kind of a big deal because Logan was the number 2 rated kicking prospect in the country. Schneider has basically taken that job and run with it. He's 9 for 9 this year. He only missed 1 kick last year. He's done a great job. Logan could have been the guy who went and sulked about it, kind of pouted. Instead, he's turned into one of the best kickoff kickers in the country this season. He's already increased his touchback total from 22 last year to 31, or it might be 23, 32. Anyways, he has 9 more than all of last season. He's done a really good job, and basically today I wrote that, if the Ducks want to look to a guy who does his job well, which is what coach has been preaching to
all the time,
to turn out of this tailspin of just do your job, do it well. Matt Logan's doing that well. And I got a Twitter comment today that says, yeah, great, our kickoff guy is doing the best. You are, which he's referring to me, more depressing than watching Pelham try to coach the defense.
Great Twitter engagement. We call that Twitter engagement.
And then the next one, this is how far the Oregon Ducks have fell. Their writers are forced to brag about the kickoff specialist. Unreal.
A cynic would say that Matt Logan is putting the Ducks in pretty good field position, but they give up 75-yard drives every time.
Yeah.
However, we can't overlook the fact that Logan is definitely probably one of the best guys at doing his job this year that the Ducks have.
Here's the thing, though. Andrew and I aren't oblivious to the fact that the Ducks are struggling. We've written about it ad nauseum the last 3 weeks or so. And there are a lot of things that we think that they can fix, they can do better, whatnot. But every single interview we do, we can't ask the coach, why aren't you firing Pelham yet? Why aren't you doing this? Who's to blame for all this sort of thing? That's just not really how that interaction works.
Right. It's at some point they tune you out, and that's a bad thing. And you ask questions when you have to, absolutely. But right now, they're 3-3. It's a very bad look. It's a very bad look for the Ducks right now. Still 6 weeks to go. Who knows what happens? This college football season is the most bizarre one since 2007 that I can remember. Of course, the Ducks played a pretty large role in that one for different reasons. Went to number 2, and then, of course, they fell back considerably. But it's not the right time, I think, in my opinion, to say, when are you going to fire your whole defensive staff? Especially because at Oregon, they don't fire. We were actually just trying to go through our memories of the last time someone was truly fired on the UVO football staff. And I can't remember one. My memory doesn't go back as well as it should, maybe into the early 2000s. But, a couple guys were let go when Chip took over as head coach in 2009. Their contracts weren't renewed. But I'm not so sure that would constitute an out-and-out firing.
Yeah. But even so...
So Oregon's really slow to do this stuff.
That's still 6 years of something where a guy's contract hasn't been renewed. That's a pretty strong streak, and Oregon has that kind of tradition of promoting from within. So a lot of these guys have been around for decades.
That's not to say at the end of the season, if this were to continue, that everybody maybe should keep their jobs.
Yeah.
But right now, I think you're running into a couple of historical trends with Oregon's willingness to promote from within and reticence to fire. Of course, their success has done that quite a bit. And then, Helfrich, he promoted Pelham. It's one of his first hires, essentially. That'd be a really tough thing to do for him, and we'll see. Yeah. We'll see. The Ducks defense is among the worst in the country. There are a lot of factors besides that have gone into this season going the way it has, and it's going to be really interesting to track it. But we have a football game coming up Saturday that's in the short term, and I want to talk about that with you, Tyson, because...
Well, good, because there's no one else here.
Yeah, because our editor didn't want to do the podcast with us. He's out in his easy chair right now in the sports department of the Oregonian. So, quarterback play. Oregon is going to be facing the Pac-12's best defense this week.
Mm-hmm.
They rate number 1 in scoring defense, about 15 points a game, total defense, rush defense, red zone defense, and they're second in pass defense.
Now, Andrew, can I ask you a question?
Fire away.
If you're playing a defense that's that good at all those things, and you have poor quarterback play, what's that mean?
It means you're going to struggle to move the ball.
Oh.
Which in turn would struggle to hold Oregon's 11-game winning streak in this series.
Mm-hmm.
So the obvious question, is do you play Vernon Adams? Let's play point counterpoint right now. Why would you play Vernon Adams Jr. this week when he hasn't played in the last 2 games completely and was pulled early in the Utah game after he essentially could not throw downfield, thus nullifying his best asset? As Scott Frost, the offensive coordinator, said, he couldn't throw the ball downfield against Utah because they rushed him back too quickly. That's what Frost has said. So why is this the right time to play him?
Under the assumption that he's at least healthy enough to be a better factor than Jeff Locke or Taylor Alley. I don't think any of us know exactly what the status of that finger, but you would assume that it's got to be better than it was against Utah a couple weeks ago. But the reason you play Vernon Adams right now is if you don't beat the Huskies, what are the other winnable games on this schedule? Oregon just stumbled through the easiest part of their schedule, Washington State. They didn't look all that great against Colorado. I think Utah was a lot better than many people guess at the start of the year, but you got this game against Washington, then it's a bye week, then you're at Arizona State, then
Cal?
It's Cal, which Jared Goff mixed up against this defense. That's kind of a recipe for disaster. Stanford
on the road
at Stanford, USC. The next one, the next game in which the Ducks would likely be favored, would be at home in Civil War against Oregon State, and if the Ducks lose a couple more games at that point, that might be the last game of the season. So if I'm the Ducks and I think Vernon Adams can play better than those other guys, I'd play him right away this week because, frankly, you need this game.
Yeah, and the counterpoint to that, not necessarily this is a viewpoint I endorse, but I think that if you can get out of this game,
like Bolton Brash.
They don't know what Bolton Brash is. Don't confuse them.
Not a lot of people did.
So if you didn't play in this game, if you could get through and they could win, that's the best case scenario, I think, for the Ducks, because then you give him 10 more days to prepare for Arizona State. Ducks have a bye after going to Seattle.
Like a quasi-bye.
Yeah, because they'll actually start practicing next Saturday on the 24th for the 29th game on a Thursday at night in Tempe against Arizona State. And so you give him that much more time, then he should be fully ready to go. That's the timeline I've been under the assumption is the right one from the beginning, once they kind of said, okay, this is what the actual issue is with the finger, here's a timeline. Arizona State seemed about right.
Yeah.
But I think that I don't necessarily agree with that viewpoint. I think you do play him this weekend. And maybe you start Locke. You brought this up before we started recording. Maybe you start Locke or Alley, whatever you prefer. And then if things get dire enough, you put Adams in there. That's a ton of pressure. But he kind of lives for this.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever watched
He's played well against Washington very recently.
Washington never allowed more than the 7 touchdowns that Adams threw against them last year in Husky Stadium. I mean, he knows how to torch a defense. Yeah. Of course, it's all predicated on him being able to throw the ball. And we just don't know that.
It's really an interesting quandary that the coaches have right now, because if you save him and he comes back and he's that player that everyone suggested that he might be, the season might already be lost by the time they I think this is pretty much depending on what as a fan you think they should be playing for, but I think this is pretty much a must-win game for this season right now in terms of whether they're going to reach any sort of postseason or not. So, you could rest Adams and have him help you finish out a nice little rise on the end of the season, or you could play him against this Washington defense that if I'm coming back from an injury, this is probably like the last defense I want to play against. But it's I don't envy the decision the coaches have to make on this one.
Yeah.
But I will be calling for one of them to be fired if they make the wrong decision.
Right, naturally.
Yeah.
Whoever plays is going to be buttressed by Bryce Freeman, possibly the best running back in the Pac-12 right now, depending on kind of how you view. I know our friends at Pro Football Focus, the college division, they rake
Devontae Booker ahead of him.
Yes, Devontae Booker of Utah ahead of Bryce Freeman. I think that's fair. I mean, I'm not going to pick hairs between them.
I think you would be a very good team if you had either one of those players.
Yeah. And you can make the case that Booker is doing just as much, even though Utah is a very good team, because Travis Wilson is still not a game-changing quarterback.
Correct.
And so I think that each guy is carrying, no pun intended, a pretty equal load. I really want to see, though, how Freeman does this weekend, whether Taj Griffin can get back to the player he was against Colorado than he was against Washington State, when his moments of brilliance were very few and far between.
I think regardless of whether Adams or Lockie or Alley or if they have you suit up at quarterback, the game plan is going to revolve around Royce Freeman, because even if Adams does come back, it's going to be his first start in several weeks and whatever. But the last 2 weeks, Royce Freeman has looked as advertised. There was a lot of hype about him coming into the season, and not that he's had bad games, but the last 2 weeks he seems to have really kind of embraced the role of, well, this offense is going to run through me for the time being. Last week was just absolutely impressive. I know that was kind of a game the Ducks pissed away, but I don't think you can really take away anything from Royce's performance.
Right. One thing that is going to be really big, I think, too, is the receiving core. Darren Carrington, we should just update people. We spoke with Mark Helfrich today in his usual Tuesday afternoon press conference, and he said that in this very interesting answer, we asked about the availability.
Let's do a role play here. You be Andrew Greif of the Oregonian, and I'll be Mark Helfrich.
This is actually what transpired today too. Mark, can we have an update on the availability of Darren Carrington for Saturday? Will he dress and or play?
First of all, Andrew, great question, and I really respect what you do, especially your Kobe partner.
That didn't happen.
Okay, that didn't happen. We will announce Darren Carrington's status after the game on Saturday.
And scene.
Yeah,
that's what happened. So essentially, when you see Darren Carrington out there, that's as good an indication as we'll have as well, which I think is silly. I guess it gives you somewhat of an advantage. Maybe they don't plan for him, but
it doesn't matter if Carrington plays if nobody can throw him the ball.
Right.
How do you think I did with my Helfrich there, by the way?
Pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah. So a couple things seen and heard around practice the last couple days. Today, left guard Matt Pearson walked out of practice. He wasn't practicing, it appeared. He was just wearing shorts and a T-shirt when everybody else was in pads. Yeah, he left the game against Washington State and did not return. Doug Brenner took his spot, and I believe it was Brenner who got called for a pretty critical holding penalty in overtime, backed the Ducks up, and really, not going to say that's what doomed him, because they went out long before. They had their chances to win in the fourth quarter. But that was a key mistake. Also, Chris Cisse, the cornerback, he was riding along a scooter per usual with one of his legs kind of up and not putting weight on it. It doesn't indicate he will play this weekend again at cornerback. Reggie Daniels was walking out of practice Monday and didn't have he clearly was not practicing. He was in the weight room in shorts and a T-shirt while everybody else was on the practice field. Safety, he wasn't available last week, Helfrich said. He made it sound like he will be back this week, but
I wouldn't be surprised to see Charles Nelson back there still, though.
Safety, yeah. You talked to John Neal this week, the secondary coach, about Charles Nelson's debut at safety. He one thing that we always heard and were told and saw in spring practice was that he was a cornerback. Why? Did you get any sense for why he was a safety?
So basically, Neal said Nelson played more safety in high school than he did cornerback, and I think Neal saw Nelson more as a natural kind of body fit for that cornerback position. Nelson's 5'8", maybe $175. Kind of more the size of a cornerback than your traditional free safety. Neal said Nelson told him kind of towards the end of the spring he wasn't all that comfortable at cornerback. He would have been more comfortable at safety. they table that discussion kind of over the summer. He goes into this fall as a receiver. And then with the way kind of injuries have shaken out with Cisse and whether Daniels was injured or whatever the heck it was, Neil said the discussion came back up again, and they were like, okay, well, let's put you where you're comfortable. And he hasn't had as many reps there as he has at other positions, but he's basically Charles Nelson is kind of known as a guy who picks things up quickly, and he has the physical skills to basically kind of make up for any sort of knowledge he will. Yeah. So, and I think you saw a lot of that. You saw some really ferocious hits from him, which I don't think should surprise anybody who's watched him gun on the punt team in the past. He did have a couple missed tackles. Neil said his effort was far from perfect, but he didn't stop Neil from saying that he thinks Charles Nelson may be one of, if not the best player, all-around player in college football right now.
Yeah, he seemed like he just put a little bit of fear back there in the back line.
Which you haven't seen that all year.
No. I think you can go at that back line every time if you want. But for some reason, maybe you can still throw over the top of Charles. But, run support, he clearly had a couple pretty big hits coming up toward the line. He blew up receiver John Williams, knocked his helmet off on a short route. He has the quickness to get to those short routes that a lot of teams are throwing against secondary. Just that way the defensive line pressure, which has been pretty good, doesn't actually get to the quarterback. And so I think he has the speed. He clearly can hit. I think he's the best hitter on the team, pound for pound. And he could be potentially that disruptor that the Ducks like to talk so much about, but they really haven't had since Eric Dargan left.
What it kind of reminded me of a little bit was after the first week of last season where the Ducks handedly beat, who was first week last season?
South Dakota State.
But you kind of saw some soft linebacking play, and then Joe Walker kind of appeared in week 2 and brought some hard hits and just playing hard on every play. I think, I don't know if that's a direct comparison, but it kind of reminded me a little bit of the way Charles Nelson came in here, just a guy that was inserted into there. One of the things that stood out to me, because we're talking about some of his missed tackles, Neil was like, he missed really big on one on the right side of the field.
Which led directly to a touchdown.
Yeah. Well, there was that. I'm talking about a different one, though. Okay. He said basically Charles missed a tackle and then ran all the way down across the other side of the field and was the first guy to tackle that guy again, beat out everybody else. I think just in terms of a guy who's out there who has probably more desire and I hate to try to quantify people's drive or whatever, right. But I think there's no player more motivated to do good out there than Charles Nelson, which I think, you talk about a secondary that's been under the gun all season. Just anything to put a little shot in the arm there, I think, is the right call.
Yeah. Speaking of motivated, I talked to a bunch of players today about just the mindset, and I actually don't like that word, but just the attitude of the locker room right now. Is there divisiveness? Is this a galvanizing start to the season, as weird as it sounds? And tight end Johnny Munt, I really appreciated his comments because he said straight up that they were very upset, and that the Washington State loss would maybe different than the Utah and Michigan State loss. I think those ones, if you're not of...
There's no bailout excuses
against
Washington State.
If you're of a certain mindset where you can kind of chalk up a loss in that locker, maybe you can say, oh, Michigan State, they were so good, and Utah, well, we just, that was a freak loss. But Washington State, that's a team that lost at home to Portland State in the first week of the season, barely beat Rutgers on the road. I mean, it's looked like a pretty uneven team. And Munt said that there's a chip on their shoulder this week that hasn't been there before. And I wonder how much that will translate this week. I think that something I'll be writing about today, so you can look on OregonLive.com/Ducks in the coming days.
Is today Tuesday or
Today's
Wednesday?
Tuesday.
So you'll be writing about that today, even though this podcast is probably going out on Wednesday.
You can probably look for it on Wednesday afternoon.
So basically, if you're listening to it, it's like a time warp.
Go to OregonLive.com/Ducks right now. But he was saying that
we'll wait.
That this has been a good thing in some ways because maybe it's woken up the players who weren't all in with the buy-in earlier in the year.
And another positive of that, I mean, this is kind of looking like it might be a lost season, but the majority of these guys are going to be back on the team next year too. So, I mean, most of the skill position guys anyway. So
yeah. Of course, the next year we'll probably have another quarterback controversy. So
yeah, so
buckle in.
Yeah, we'll do a whole bunch of podcasts on that, and I'll write more about the kickers. So until then, Andrew, where can you find this podcast if you didn't happen to already find this?
You can find it in iTunes. Search the official visit.
The official.
Yeah, I misspoke.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks. You can search for the official visit in iTunes. You can go to OregonLive.com/Ducks where we'll have a link to it as well.
And I heard a rumor about you. I heard that you don't get all that upset if people rate 5 stars on the podcast.
I take 4 stars even.
Okay, well, that's a good word.
Tyson leading us out on another stellar podcast ending. You can find us on Twitter at Tyson Alger.
You can.
At Andrew Greif. And thanks for listening this far. If you've made it to 20 minutes and 55 seconds, you get a gold star.
Maybe 5 gold stars.
You've won the day. Have a good day.